You've been enjoying Drupal Flyover Camp, and thank you for being here at 3 o'clock on a Saturday for my talk. Before I dive in, I just wanted to thank our gracious sponsors for making this happen and also for giving me this opportunity to speak. And also thank you to the VML Y&R volunteer team, because I know they put a lot of hard work into this. I also want to give a little background on myself, an intro to my unique perspective. Some of you will already know this. But tech is actually a new path for me. I studied marketing and design in college and was in various client experience roles previously in my career. You could say that I was in the front end of the business world, but I quickly realized that I prefer to be in the back end, working behind the scenes. I've always had very strong creative and technical sides of my brain, and for me about getting into tech was marrying the two. So I was able to take the leap into a new career with the help of LaunchCode. I just want to take a moment to talk about what they do because I'm very grateful for the opportunities that they've given me and because they have opportunities to give to you. LaunchCode is a nonprofit organization that offers free coding boot camps and courses to individuals wanting to get into the tech world. There are no prerequisites in terms of, or there's no barriers to entry in terms of prerequisite classes or prior experience in anything related to tech at all. People come in from the widest range of backgrounds that you can imagine. They also have very robust relationships with organizations in the area. They currently have classes here in St. Louis and the Tampa areas. And what they do with those relationships is place launch coders in apprenticeships where they can apply the skills they just learned and land jobs in tech. So, after taking one of LaunchCode's courses, I am now in apprenticeship with VML Y&R, using the skills I learned, learning much, much more, and which is why I'm able to be here today to talk to you. If you know anyone wanting to get into tech, I highly recommend looking at LaunchCode's opportunities. If you are looking for tech talent, I also highly recommend looking at LaunchCode's opportunities. The apprenticeship program is a really great way to identify and integrate some very diverse talent. So, as I said, I am currently doing an apprenticeship with VML Y&R. This is where I got my first introduction to Drupal. My first project I worked on was a Drupal site theme refactor project for a client. This encompassed a multitude of initiatives, but to name a few, we completed a full site audit of paragraph content types, templates, module uses to see where there is room to consolidate or remove. We also focused heavily on the integration of some good practices the VML Y&R Drupal team has set for pre-processes, library management, compiling tasks, just to name a few. And we also implemented a design system and created a living style guide for developer ease of use. So, that being said, the process of starting from the very beginning and learning Drupal is fresh in my mind. Just like trying to master anything in the tech world, the learning curve can be hard. I think that our Drupal community is as strong as our ability to share practice with others. And to successfully teach others, we need to first take a step back and remember the obstacles that beginners face. I came across an interesting article about why coding is so hard, and it had a diagram in it that illustrated the difficulty of learning curves by comparing the inverse relationship between confidence and knowledge. I consider myself to be a very visual person, and visual representations help me form strong associations, so I decided to draw my own version. I'm going to break apart each of these sections of a learning curve more, but to give an overview, when we first start on a journey to master a new skill, we often shoot upward with a wave of confidence. We have a plethora of hand-holding resources that can get us to a basic level of knowledge, and we feel like the current is moving with us. However, in reality, we may not fully understand the inner workings of how all the pieces move together. As we run out of highly polished tutorials, there's a moment of realization that we may not be fully equipped to take on the problems. This drop is when we try to venture out from resources out on our own. We need a deeper understanding of concepts, but we can't move forward because we're caught in the undertow. The scope of what we need to know is at its peak, but there are infinite paths to explore and sparse resources to target project-specific problems. We are working against the current, and we find ourselves struggling to resurface. To better understand how we can prevent this drop in momentum that we see, let's take a closer look at each part of the learning curve to help us understand what typically happens and how we can improve our processes to help Drupal beginners. If you Google Drupal 8 tutorial, there are 13.4 million search results. If you scan the first page, you'll see highly polished resources like Drupalize Me, Udemy, Acquia, to name a few. You can spend hours looking at these sites and watching tutorials. This is where I think we often have the misconception of equating hours spent reading and watching to actual understanding gained. The time and effort you dedicate boosts your confidence, and it should. I like thinking of this as the hello world phase because you have the skills to get something on a page, and that feels good, but you've only gotten to a basic level of knowledge. You learn all the shiny words, and maybe you can hold a high-level conversation, and you start feeling comfortable with the terminology, but the key is that you are not yet fluent. As the problems and projects you face start becoming more complex, you start realizing you may not be fully equipped to take them on. This is where we can reach a point of confusion and frustration. We keep reaching back to those initial tutorials and documentation, but we need a layer of understanding that's just a little deeper. This is when I find myself torn between persistence in the face of problems and humility to ask for help. We want to reach out to people, but in the journey of our wave, we don't know who to ask or trust, what to ask, and how to even formulate quality questions. A major factor of this drop is that our dense concentration of resources starts to thin out. When we move closer towards a project-specific task or problem, we are caught by the undertow, and our resources to pinpoint specific solutions we're looking for become more sparse. This is where we do a lot of trial and error with possible solutions, but we can't seem to find a clear answer because we're in need of a little more customization for our unique circumstances. We try to apply our general knowledge of how to approach a situation, but don't necessarily know why or which. Maybe you have an idea of a few paths to explore, but these can quickly branch off into more and more options. This is where I start going down rabbit holes and find myself with 20 tabs open, because I'm able to find partial answers, but not a fully functioning solution yet. So, the big question is, how do we resurface? How do we get back to a comfortable and confident state, able to tackle the unique problems that we're seeing from Drupal project to project? When I first began to answer this question, I was thinking from the perspective of having taken the wave of confidence, had the drop in momentum, and I'm sitting in the deep realm of complex problems. And from that perspective, the rise to resurface seemed very steep and prolonging, and that's when I realized maybe we need to take this back to the very beginning. If we can improve our approach from the initial upward stretch, maybe we can keep the momentum and counter the drop effect we normally run into. So, from the beginning, what if we took the endless curriculum options and provided a basic roadmap to navigate them more efficiently? It can be easy for beginners to jump all over the place and lose sight of a clear direction. For example, the Develop Drupal Sites guide on Drupalize Me has 21 defined essential lessons, and most of them have recommended lessons to complete as prerequisites, and also some contain additional tutorials within those lessons. Their lesson pages also display the 73 related module development lessons in the right-hand bar, just taunting people to click on them. I think all this content can be useful, but it can also be very overwhelming for a beginner. It can also facilitate a quantity over quality mindset because you're in a state where you're just trying to absorb as much as you can as fast as you can. So when we're onboarding new Drupal devs, we usually have a specific journey in mind for them. Maybe they are coming on to implement a design system or set up pre-processes. There's usually some initial starting point we can guide them towards. If we curate specific lessons or topics to tackle that relate to their specific developer journey, we can help turn that perceived knowledge into a more concrete understanding. This will give them a solid starting place and understanding that parallels the wave of confidence that they are experiencing. Next, we can prevent the concepts we've just learned from getting disconnected from applications by providing context. Giving scenarios are basically exercises for beginners to complete. Will provide them with use cases of why and how. They'll be able to take all the pieces that they've just learned and understand how they all fit together. The exercise could be as basic as creating a node, but it wouldn't be simply creating a node. They would have to build paragraph types, create fields, maybe learn how to reference entities or create different view modes. And also they'd have to learn about Drupal configuration and how to successfully export their YAML files without blowing everything up. It's important for some exercises to also show that there are multiple paths to reach the same goal. This helps answer the which question down the road. When you're trying to decide between multiple solutions, you can figure out which one is best fit for your particular situation. Simple tasks like this are key for beginners because this is how we begin to understand how everything is connected and create a solid foundation to build upon. I think also an interesting concept is also purposely provoking beginners to complete exercises that will result in errors. I know for myself and many others, the best way to learn something is to do it incorrectly or to break it. So along the lines of test-driven development, knowing what breaks something and how can lead to a full understanding and cleaner execution in the future. When you start to enter the more project-specific area of the spectrum, I found that this is when people are the best resources, not tutorials or documentation. Oftentimes, this is when your problem can't be solved by simply Googling. Clear solutions don't appear immediately because this is where experience working on Drupal projects and project diversity are very valuable. Your peers, your team, the people in this room, I think have a wealth of Drupal experiences and learning. Knowledge transfers like this camp across organizations or on a smaller internal scale across teams and groups can help bridge this gap. So, for example, on the current client project I'm working on, we have regular open sessions when all the devs get together. One of the more experienced team members with a lot of project-specific knowledge basically teaches a short JavaScript lesson on some valuable methods and practices he implements in his code. And this is very beneficial because we can immediately link the lesson directly to examples in our code base. These lessons are for JavaScript specifically, but I think this is an idea that can be applied to other Drupal aspects. I know when I was and still am learning, it would be extremely helpful to have a scheduled time, maybe every week or so is needed, where a knowledge expert or a fellow team member with experience in a particular area could walk through their process and explain how they implemented a solution. I think this could also serve as a good way to do a sweep across the team and make sure that everyone is adhering to good practices as well. Also, along those lines, I think regular code reviews serve a good purpose and are a good time for open conversations. beginner and junior devs should definitely be attending these to get exposure and knowledge from trusted guides. It's a time when you can have all of your best resources in the room at one time at your disposal. At the same time, many questions that beginners will have and bring to the table will force the more experienced team members to go back to ground level and explain the true whys of what they're doing that maybe they normally wouldn't have to. To decrease the amount of abstract problems as well individuals will face, we can also work to standardize processes. It can go back to helping provide that clear outline for a path for learning and also streamline processes for onboarding new Drupal devs. The Drupal team at VML Y&R is working on a kit that includes some good practices to help standardize processes from project to project. Also, I think as much documentation as you have time for. Jeff Sykes, the group technology director at VML Y&R, framed a good question about the effectiveness of your documentation. He said, "Can I go on vacation without someone calling me?" I think this is a good concept. I don't think there's such a thing as something being too well documented, especially in the technology world. Whether it's how to get a site up and running locally, maybe project goals, or even just a list of some helpful resources. I think case studies in particular are something we should continue to do and do more of. With each new project, we are encountering new problems, new findings and solutions, writing case studies per project that outline what worked well, what didn't, lessons learned, can serve as a good reference moving forward. Another form of documentation I also like the idea of is an error archive. I've noticed the workflow of researching an error. When you get stuck, you put it up on Slack, but then I always find myself trying to remember if someone has had the same error and how far back in the channel it is. And I know sites like Stack Overflow have similar purposes, and maybe this would be a better internal specific tool. But I think as the archive grew, some of the errors could start matching up and we could start saving more of each other's time. So these are just a few ideas of ways we might help guide beginners through the learning curve. In this talk, I've applied this wave of learning to understanding Drupal as a whole, but I think it's important to call out that we will all experience this wave at more granular levels per Drupal element. Each of us has probably gone through creating a module, solving a layout problem, or whatever it may be. You will always have multiple of these waves happening at the same time. Even as we start to master more aspects of Drupal, we will always return to this pattern, no matter what your experience or expertise level. In fact, this can be applied to any technology practice. However, if we continue to reshape our perspectives and implement process improvement methods, we can decrease the amplitude of the depths we go into each time we approach this pattern. My intent by breaking apart this learning curve today is to create an open conversation about how we can continue to adopt approaches that help beginners through the learning curve and integrate them into our practice and our teams faster and more efficiently. So I want to challenge everyone here today to take this discussion, apply your own unique perspectives and experiences, and continue the cycle of process improvement. That's it.